Hey, everybody, we are live here today with our good friend Ben Blankenchip and our great guest, Mr. Aaron Lopresti. How are you, everybody? Welcome to iShook. Behold, we are in the domain of iShook, here to talk about comics, the comic world, the book publication world, which is comic book publication. And we're here to learn and just learn and learn and learn because you never can stop learning. So welcome everybody, and don't forget the QR code for Mr. Aaron Lopresti, and don't forget where's Ben's QR code? Don't forget to scan a Ben, get a Ben. Here's Ben, and get into his social medias. If you ever want to question him or ask him or actually challenge him and all the things that he says.
Mm.
And if you want to also challenge his bloopers, then you're more than welcome. Where he always, a spoiler alert. He even has a special hat. Spoiler alert.
It's irrelevant if it happened 5 minutes ago and you don't talk about it. This is the 21st century, Benny. You need to get with it.
Well, there's no possible way I can read everything and watch everything at the same
Mm.
time. Anyway, so welcome. Talk to us. How are we? How are we doing? Mr. Presley, please introduce yourself. Tell us, for people like me who are novices, who don't know nothing, are really away from this industry and just here to learn about the industry.
Well, I am a writer and an artist, mostly been an artist for the last 30 plus years. I've worked at Marvel,
Wow.
DC, done some work at Wildstorm. I've worked at CrossGen Comics. I've worked at Dark Horse.
Oh,
Boom,
wow.
just about Archie. I have worked for just about everybody over that 30 plus year period. And the last 4 years, probably, I've been self-publishing under my own title, Empire Comics, or my own label, Empire Comics. And that's what I'm doing now, is doing original graphic novels that I own, and which is kind of a novel concept that we never experienced while working in the mainstream. We actually now, as creators, get to own our own stuff. So that's kind of fun and exciting.
That's awesome. When we started to go to the DBW here in New York, I think they were sold to some company in Tennessee now. So I haven't been attending for many years. They started to open up in 2013 about what we call the hybrid author, right? Where the author is a publisher slash writer slash meaning slash author. So basically, you're creating yourself both the publisher and the author at the same time. So it's the hybrid author or hybrid writer, whatever you want to call it. And I didn't realize it also went into comics too. Look at that. I didn't. That's
I think
interesting.
that's become like way more normalized now. It was
Oh,
revolutionary,
now,
wasn't
but
it? When Image did it, wasn't that kind of like the first that people saw of that, where it's like you can keep your rights and everything?
Yeah, Image actually started when they put together their team, and their first year of publication was done through Malibu Comics, which then gave them the money to do the Ultraverse books, which I worked for very early in my career. And but then they took over not distribution, but they took over management of their products, books, whatever. And so yeah, they were essentially creator publishers at that point. And they were the first, I think, and probably the last until just recently, where you see a big movement of people jumping in, sort of because of crowdfunding, that allows us to raise money to do the projects.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a lot more people self-publish with the properties that they have. So I don't have to go to DC or Marvel and trying to convince them that they should publish, something of mine and then give away all the rights or part of the rights. I can keep everything myself and still get the book out there. So so far it's worked pretty well.
I think it's worth every dollar, because what they can do is they can shelf your project. I mean, so far with all the interviews we've been doing, some of these books or publications are being shelved, and it's such a beautiful IP that can really today be revitalized. It can be rebooted. Like today, they're rebooting so many movies. You can reboot so many, IPs in the comic world. I mean, there's so much there and that's why I have the interest in doing it, because that's why we're doing the podcast, because I love comics too. I mean, I'm not a comic savant. I have other interests too, but but at the same time, I believe that comics should come back. I think the book world, in regards to hard copies, coming back. Barnes and Noble's reopening 60 stores nationwide. That's in itself is huge. I predicted its fall, its downfall, and I was right, but I could have never predicted it coming back.
Well, it's interesting that when comics really opened up sort of their digital platforms, they found that there was a ceiling to their sales numbers on digital. So they could expect whatever that number was, 5,000 people, 10,000 people, I don't know. But I was told specifically that they found that there was a ceiling to that readership. And so there seems to be, even though there's people that like the convenience of digital download, there's still quite a number of people that actually enjoy holding a book or reading a book and that physical, tangible experience of it. And circling back to what you said about IPs getting shelved, the comic industry is just kind of a tiny version of the film industry. And everybody that's in charge, and now when you have actually movie studios and bigger corporations owning these comic companies, they're really afraid to stick their neck out and do something that may or may not be guaranteed success. So, it was really easy to get someone to say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's talk about that. And then when it actually got down to being implemented, generally they chickened out and would say, I don't want to do that because there's too much of a chance that it might not work. And then you have a failure on your hands. Even, you're talking smaller money with comic books than you are a film, but the mindset was the same. There was a lot of pressure coming down from on top. And so guys in charge were very reluctant to stick their neck out on a new project, even with a well-known creator. So it was always challenging to get new stuff.
So I was saying, let me. I'm sorry for man. Let me ask this question 1 second. So just to understand, you're referring for them to reinvest or invest in a comic IP that they already own, right? That's what you're saying, or you're
no.
referring
If I were to come to them and say, like I have a book right now I'm doing called Wraith of God, which is kind of a superhero Western where he hunts down monsters, right? It's a very cool looking concept and everything. And I actually was talking to DC about doing it, and we never got past the stages of talking because it was with Dan DiDio, and of course he got let go, and then everything got shook up at DC. But even if I would take their properties, like I was bugging Dan for years to do, they have a character called Metamorpho, which we'd probably say is maybe a C-level character, in terms of popularity.
He's going to be in that new Superman movie. You didn't see that, right?
No, I didn't. So there you go. He's coming back. And so I pitched this thing to him. He liked the story and everything, but he was apprehensive to do it because he thought, well, it's probably not going to sell. And so it took years actually before we actually did it. And I actually had a creator-owned project called Garbage Man that I do now have the rights to. It's a monster book. And I had talked him into doing it. He was ready to do it, but then every time we got to the point we're just about ready to launch it, he'd pull back a little bit. It was going to be its own series. And he's like, oh, let's do a mini series. That's safer. And I'm like, okay. And then it was, well, let's do this as a backup in the Batman books. And then it was like, okay, we'll do a mini series anthology thing. And it got kind of lost in the shuffle. And, but there was always that pressure. You could just feel it coming, from above saying, don't put something out there that's not going to make money. And so it's easy to get a Batman project off the ground because they know everybody's going to buy Batman, but something newer or even one of their own characters that isn't as popular was really hard to get a project off the ground.
So it's really a fear factor, right? They have this fear factor.
Exactly.
Sorry, Ben, go on.
Fear of failure.
Did you see that Vertigo is back, and what's your take on that? I hear that they'll put the comic out and you're good with that, but they'll like lock it down for movies or anything else that it could prospectively do. Do you have a take on Vertigo?
Well, I think it was good when it started. I was not much of a Vertigo guy. I didn't really keep track. I mean, I was aware of what was going on, but I didn't read the material very often. But it was really sort of, they kind of packaged it as adult content, not in the sense that it would be pornographic necessarily, but, more mature themes, different themes, stuff that wouldn't sell on mainstream superheroes like fantasy and that type of thing. And, but I always thought it was good because you had more creator-owned stuff going through Vertigo, or at least stuff that was created or IPs that were created by writers or artists, and they were at least allowed to have a piece of the action, and they didn't have to give it all up. So I don't know much about the new Vertigo. I saw that it was being launched, but I don't know into what capacity or what the parameters are on it.
What about from comic to movies? Obviously, like DC is owned by Warner Brothers, and you have Marvel owned by Disney, and I'm sure they have a whole litany of comics of IPs through. It's not just Batman and Superman and X-Men, right? I mean, are they also fearing the risk of banking on those kind of comics or those IPs? Because you see, with Netflix, they took One Piece, they took what's it called? What else did they take? One Piece, and they took Airbender, and they took another comic.
Daredevil,
No,
Punisher.
Netflix. No, I'm talking manga. They took two manga and they made it huge. What was the other one that you liked? The manga that you liked, and it didn't really succeed.
They did some Maroni. Oh, you mean the Cowboy Bebop and
Yeah, Cowboy Bebop.
which was perfect, but not sales wise. But I mean, the thing was,
I think they just picked the wrong actors. Honestly, I just think
they did not. They did not.
Okay, maybe
they did not.
that's debatable.
No,
that's debatable.
Okay, it's debatable. Anybody that says that, he said, if you want to debate me again, you're wrong. They sounded right. They looked right. The stories were right. The music.
So why didn't it make money? Why was it a flop?
This goes into blaming the fans or people that say that they're fans. I mean, when you have ad at the end of it and they say ad was too much spot on to ad,
I got it, but obviously
criticize the other way. They were going to make the second season like the movie.
Obviously, One Piece was good, right? And One Piece already has
I've never watched it. I've never read One Piece. I've had nothing to do with One Piece.
Oh my god!
Yeah. You and Naruto and One Piece. We're talking about comics here, not manga.
Dereliction of a comic person, man. Dereliction of duty, bro. Like the fact that you don't know One Piece.
Have you ever read Death Note?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Oh, I don't
like it. I don't like it.
There's something wrong with man.
I don't like. Okay, anyway, let's get back to it. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
let's get back to it.
Aaron, anyway, dude,
it's good for TV. Go ahead.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, Aaron, I had you were talking about contact in DC. I've had people saying, man, you need to get and like write a Batman story or something with DC. I don't know that I'll hear back from them. I want to ask you about this, about editors and all that, because I'm curious how it works. So my impression is that they're probably really cliquey and really guarded, just like freaks in church. And that unless they like know somebody that like, unless you said this is B.O. Blankenchip and you had some kind of thing with them, that they're not going to say, show me your stuff, man. It's just going to be like spam. But I reached out to Chris Conroy because he's got his editor name on like everything that I like. I like really violent, like Dexter, like Seven, like that type of thing. So we're talking like that. I love the Penguin. I love the Batman. The Batman was my favorite Batman movie, hands down, bar none. The Dark Knight series would be after that. I mean, I feel like you need to have like a sheen of sweat on everybody, and it just needs to be like nasty, even though they like race swapped a bunch of people, whatever. The tone was right.
Well, I can tell you what used to be and what's going on now is sort of interesting. And I don't have as much insight because I haven't been involved in it for a few years, but it's always been political in the sense that it's who you know, right? And you have to spend as much time making connections as you do submitting work. And it's always tougher for writers because as an artist, I could just give them a couple pieces of, a couple pages and they could look at them in, a minute and make a decision on whether or not they liked it or not. You turn in a script or you turn in a plot, they got to read something. I mean, someone has to sit down there, focus and read. And that's the difficult thing. Now, the flip side to that is editors are always looking for the next new and great talent that they can say they discovered and brought in. So they're always looking, but at the same time, it's difficult, again, from a writer's standpoint, to get someone to sit down and take the time to read your material because it is time consuming. And it's easier just to call somebody they know or go after somebody they've heard of that has a reputation already. So like artists, like we used to, and I think it still holds true, it's easier to start with a smaller company, a Boom or a Dark Horse or, Dynamite or someplace like that honestly doesn't pay that well, or certainly doesn't pay as well as Marvel and DC. And so you can get some stuff published and then you can say, oh, look at this miniseries I did for so-and-so. And those are easier to break into than to go directly from, nothing to Batman, for example, because like I said, it's just really, really difficult to get them to look at your stuff. We used to be able to go to conventions, and they always had representation at, Marvel, DC, all the companies would have representation, and they would be people you could talk to, people you could show your portfolio to, whatever, and you could make connections that way. And they've stopped going for the most part and representing at these cons because it's just too much money, and they're just continually cutting costs because they're making less money, and their corporate, whoever's owns them, the corporation owns them, is always squeezing, to spend less money and that type of thing. So they don't have that presence anymore. But on the flip side, again, you have the internet, which we didn't have when I was breaking in. So there's different ways to get in contact with people, but I would think it's probably much harder now to make those connections because it's just not. I mean, we don't live in a personable society anymore, really. We live on an online society, so it makes it a lot more difficult to make those personal connections. And I still think they're needed at least from a political standpoint.
Well, well,
yeah. It's easier to tell somebody off when they can't knock your teeth down your throat.
Well, not just that. I'll be honest with you. What a good joke as always. But what I
was serious.
What I would say is when you meet someone, it's easy to tell, your gut feeling. Oh, I can make money with this guy. Oh, I can bank on this guy. Oh, this guy seems a little shaky. Not every comic illustrator is someone you put money on, right? It's just the reality. Some of them, you got to see their personality. Are they capable for finishing a project, starting something, ending something, right? Those are key factors as well. Me as a business person, I don't want to bank on a person, because if me banking on the person, I want a long-term relationship with this person, and I want long-term money with this person. I don't want to be able to do one comic and stop. No, I want to be able to do a whole IP with this person. Yeah. That's why I'm also very picky who I, start with in business. I mean, we have our own comic that we started, Super Black, and we have ups and downs. And by the way, just to tell everybody, we're doing a Roblox game for Super Blacks. It's an announcement that we're doing now in iShook. So we're also thinking about IP and expanding the IP, not just comics. So we're going to be doing the comics. We're going to be doing the story. We're doing a novel. We're doing an IP with a Roblox game. And honestly, I'm trying to get as many people as possible in the comic industry. Listen, give me some of your characters. Let's put them on a Roblox game. Mm-hmm. Let kids get to know who you are for the future generations to know your IP. I mean, that's how you got to do it. How else will you get to those kids who are going to be your fans in the future? We're not trying to indoctrinate kids. We're trying to just get kids to know stories and have fun with the story. That's it.
Well, it's more of a gaming is way more popular than comics are at the moment. So that's a much better avenue for getting stuff out there, character wise and things like that. And once you have, even if it's new characters, because I'm sure that, you look at some of the video game properties that started as video game properties and then became very popular. Then they turned into comics, and they turned into movies, and they turned into these other things. So that is a good place to get a wider audience exposed to your IPs, whatever they may be. And then you have a better chance of succeeding as you branch out into other markets. That definitely.
Right.
So did you write or did you draw Batman? I just want to get back on the Batman kick. And by the way, the reason that the talk built up with me is because I wrote something for a comic jam that people went wild over, but then the artists basically didn't get up and do much on it. But the one that did drop something, I've got him illustrating my Hellfire stuff because I'm like, this dude is on fire. Mine has Victor Zsasz in it. I really like Victor Zsasz a lot. What did you do with Batman?
I did like a very short run of about 3 or 4 issues. Actually, I think I was just filling in while they were trying to figure out who they wanted to be the regular artist, and apparently it wasn't me. But so I did 4 issues of Detective. What I did do, though, however, was write. I wrote and drew a Batman story that was originally for their digital line, and then it got released in one of the Legends of the Dark Knight annuals, newer annuals that they did the last 10 years. And so I wrote and drew a story for that. And then the other Batman stuff I did was, I think, 4 issues of Detective, but I didn't write it. And then, his appearances in Justice League and other things like that, I would draw him in whatever other books I was working on that he happened to guest star in, but I only wrote the one Batman story.
Interesting. Let me ask you a question. When it comes to comics, this is our debate in our internal company, and we want to learn a little bit more. Sometimes, not every illustrator can work with you. Maybe they get a different job. Maybe they're, I think there's a life on certain illustrators with certain comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when the comics are being changed from hands of one illustrator to another illustrator, the styles are changing, right? Is there anything wrong with issues having different styles? Or is there something, like, in your experience, what's the best method?
He's saying issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, and
Yeah.
one of them has Adam Hughes, and the next one has Frank Miller doing it. Polar opposite. I'd be way harder Hughes. I don't like Frank Miller's art. He's good as a writer.
Okay, I mean, that's a side point, right? All right, that's a side point. I don't want. Let's not insult people on the podcast.
Well,
we want to get them back.
Dude,
we want to get them on the podcast, Ben. Come on, come on.
It makes.
We didn't say that, Mr. Howard. We love you. You're more than welcome to come.
No, I said Frank Miller.
Oh, you don't like Frank Miller?
I don't like his art. I don't like
Mr. Frank Miller. I like
when I was in the 4th grade, I could have grown with it.
I have not seen you. Okay, anyway, I'm just kidding. Anyway, the bottom line is, what do you think? How do this is good TV, Ben. Go ahead.
I think you want continuity, at least within story arcs, depending on how you're doing your series, right? I did a series called Damage. It was kind of DC's Hulk character. It only lasted, I think, 18 issues or something, but I didn't launch it. I was working on something else, and I think it was Tony Daniel launched the book, but he only did 3 issues. And then they brought in another artist, Kerry Nord, who actually I thought his stuff looked really good on it, but they didn't think he was doing the character right. So they got rid of him and they brought in somebody else. And then that guy didn't do a very good job, period. So they canned him. And then they call me up 9 issues into the series and go, "Hey, Aaron, we need you to come on this and save this book." And I'm like, you've already destroyed your audience by going through 3 different artists in 9 issues. And so there was, and the quality was just, all over the place. So by the time I got in there and did the last, 10, 11 issues of the run, you'd already lost half your audience, right? Because of stuff like that. So, but if the book is set up to be different story arcs, maybe even with different creators every 4 issues or something like that, then I think it's fine. But if you're doing just a regular monthly book like The Flash or, whatever, Green Lantern, then you want consistency on there so your audience knows what they're getting every month. Now, granted, if they don't like what you're giving them, they'll let you know. Then you make a change, right?
Right.
But you don't want to be having guys dip in and out. I only want to do 3 issues, or I want to do 2 issues and then take off, and then you got to scramble to find whoever's available to do that, this issue till you find someone else to do the next issue. Then it just feels like everything's thrown together, and it just feels like, it looks like crap usually, and there's no continuity and nothing that the reader can really grab onto long term. So again, it would depend if you're doing an anthology book like I did. When DC had the Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters, they had the rights to the characters. They did this thing called Future Quest, which was basically Johnny Quest adventures, but it had all the other characters, were worked in throughout this 12-issue maxi series, or whatever you want to call it. And then when that was done, they started something called Future Quest Presents. And it was geared towards using all these different characters from the Hanna-Barbera universe in story arcs, right? So the people buying that were like, okay, well, this first 3 issues is going to be Space Ghost by whoever. And then Steve Rude's going to do 2 issues of Birdman. And then after that, it's going to be the Herculoids with Aaron Lopresti. And so you bought it because you liked the idea of the different things and the different creators and the different characters. But that wasn't a continuity strip in the sense of, Batman. So
as long as you're in the same story arc with the same design, you're good to go.
Okay, you don't want to be switching people out in the middle of story arcs. And,
right. Which makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
You would be disappointed. So So I was
Yeah.
gonna show you, Aaron. Like if you had varying styles, like this is what sold me on Batman First Night. Mike Perkins is the
Oh, yeah,
artist for
Mike's
that.
great. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
worked with Mike.
it's outstanding. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like I love that style, the writing, the noir, all that. I really like Wesley Dodd's Sandman too. I think the guy did like a Robin or something. It's more cartoony, but the colors are great. It really
Mhm.
pops. All kinds of stuff. Hey Benny, incidentally, I also have another hot book.
You got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Super Black. Look at
There,
that,
yes,
baby.
yes. I'll open a
That's our
page.
comic that we published, Super Black.
Gotcha.
So
Nice,
yeah,
nice. It was very
but
good.
but yeah, man, I totally agree with you. That would just like throw you completely off, and because like that book, n- I love the way it looks.
Mhm.
Which is why I got Batman Damned, which I hate the writing. It's like an acid trip story. It's written in the way that Hellblazer's written in. I know Benny probably doesn't get that, but it's like this nerd speak, weird, esoteric. Like I hate it. So there's
Mhm.
people that love it, but I mean, like bleh, hate it. And I thought I'm gonna get this because the artwork. It's the edited one, by the way, where the penis is shaded out.
Okay.
You don't need to know Benny, but but yeah, but it's like I want to get this because the artwork looks so awesome, and I
Mhm.
read the story, and it's like every single thing. I'm just gonna go with my spoiler alert thing. This has been up for a while. The Joker's dead, but then at the end, the Joker's not even dead, so the whole story was the only redeeming quality in that is that Swamp Thing is awesome. He was the only likable character. Everybody else was a jerk. If they all got killed by Swamp Thing, best book ever. But
Yeah, there's you find that there's two kinds of readers, and there's people that have certain they get well, like you look at a book and you say, I like the art, so I'm gonna pick it up and read this because I like the art. When I was working on Wonder Woman, I had people telling me, oh man, you're the greatest Wonder Woman artist ever, right? But then as soon as I left Wonder Woman, those people did not go with me to my next project. They stayed on Wonder Woman because they were Wonder Woman fans.
yeah,
And then whoever was the next artist, I'm sure they said, oh my gosh, you're the best Wonder Woman artist ever. So there's two kinds of fan base: the people that are in love with the character and they just stay with the character no matter what. And then there's people that follow creators, right? Well, that guy did a really great job on this book. I'll bet he does really good on this one. I'm going to go read this now. So, and you never know how that splits, the
Yeah.
demographics or anything in sales. But I still think that continuity is the best way to maintain readership over the long haul on any particular project. As long as your creative team is good and people are responding to it, you want to keep them together.
No doubt, but then they have leverage over you in a business perspective, which is not good.
Well, they're more afraid of you. They because of what happened with Image Comics, where say Todd McFarlane gets on Spider-Man, right? And it just blows up. It's the biggest thing ever. And they're paying him these huge royalties because the numbers are so high. And suddenly he has all the fans are supporting him. He has the power, right? So what they started doing after Image is they started limiting creators to limited runs on series. Like I was on Wonder Woman for a year and a half, and everybody was happy, everybody loved it, but they came to me still and said, "Well, we want to move you to something else now," because they didn't want me to become the popular Wonder Woman artist. They wanted to maintain control of the creative talent and the books and the characters, and they didn't want any one artist or writer to become so powerful with a fan base that they were calling the shots rather than DC or Marvel. And so they have actually, they'll let you draw a book for a year, maybe two, and then they'll move you in most cases.
So they do this on purpose then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. You don't want to
Todd
have
McFarlane
someone.
was huge. All the Image stuff. all these artists that sold books because their names were on them, and Marvel was like not paying them well and selling profuse amounts of, it's not like here, like where we're making whatever on the books. It's like if you were making millions and millions of dollars off of each issue, and it's like you're not even going to give somebody like a bonus. Todd McFarlane said, my dad worked at a factory and got a plaque. I didn't even get a plaque. You don't even care. And then a bunch of them walked. And then when they started up Image and they were popular, Image blew up and they were driving Ferraris and everything. And Todd's still done well with his business, making like all these intricate toys and whatever.
Well, what specifically happened with Image, the way that the royalty structure was set up at Marvel at the time, and I don't know at DC because I wasn't there. So I was focused on Marvel at that period of time, but you still had newsstand sales. And what they would do is every 100, you would start off at, well, let's say, I can't remember exactly, but the first 100,000 copies, you would get 1.5% as the artist, you get 1.5% of the gross sales on any book. Okay.
Wow, that's
because
a lot.
most books weren't selling, that much. They were selling 50,000, 60,000 copies. But then when that boom hit, these numbers started getting up to 200, 300, 400, 500,000. And every 100,000, that percentage went up 0.5 point. So you went from 1.5% to when it sold 200, now you got 2%. Then if it got to 300, you got 3%. And so by the time it got to 1 million copies, which McFarlane was doing, Jim Lee did on X-Men, they did multiple $1 million, these guys were making incredible, like 10, 12, 13% off the gross number of sales. And so Marvel restructured their entire royalties system so that they would never have to pay out that much money again.
Wow.
So these guys would do one issue that sold, 6 or 7 million copies, and they'd get a $13 million check off one issue. It was insane. And and that's kind of where the friction started between those guys and Marvel, was the finances, I think, probably more than anything. And I think Todd was a little bit more of a visionary from a business standpoint, saying, hey, if we can sell these many copies, at Marvel, if we did it ourselves, even if we only sold half as many or a third as many, but we got all the money, he did the math and was like, pfft. And that's kind of what happened there. And then after that, Marvel said, okay, we can't they really tried to prohibit guys from becoming superstars after that because it cost them so much money.
Interesting.
So Benny,
Yeah.
we have a guest on here. We need to shamelessly plug his books that he has available right now. You've got Garbage Man, you've got Wraith of God, you've got Kit Carter's Outer Space. Garbage Man's Like a Monster, Wraith of God, which is what I want to talk more about, because I've written Western horror. I don't know if you know this, Aaron. I've written a lot of Western horror, super violent Western stuff. Love it. Monsters in the West, whatever. So what is Wraith of God? What's his backstory? Is he dead? Does he have superpowers? What's his deal that he's hunting monsters down?
Well, he's more of like a Batman of the Old West. So he doesn't have any superpowers, but he knows a lot of stuff, and he's great hand-to-hand combat. But the idea is that he and this is your Reader's Digest version, if you guys know that reference. The shorter version is basically he had this he was a criminal, and he had this vision that he thought was from God, telling him that he needed to go do this and hunt monsters and wipe evil off the face of the Old West. And we're not really sure at this point whether he was a drunken vision, or if he actually, God did come down and talk, angel came down and talked to him and told him all this, but he's operating under that principle. And then he manipulates this Salvation Army worker, this woman that he falls in love with from afar, and then he gets to know her and then manipulates the situation. So she basically has to join him as his partner, and becomes kind of his Alfred to his Batman. And they ride around the Old West hunting monsters. And
does she wear the uniform? Does she have the Salvation Army uniform on?
Well, she did. She doesn't anymore. She just has classic 1883 female garb. So, and so they have sort of a contentious relationship, and she's learning more about him and more the truth, or what might be the truth. And so you have that interesting kind of dynamic. And then, of course, you have every graphic novel, they're in a different situation. The first one, they were hunting this clan of werewolves, and it's a bit of a mystery as well because you don't know who's a werewolf and who isn't, and so they're trying to find that out as they're trying to stop them. And the second one is kind of a Nosferatu vampire story, very much sort of like reminiscent of a Hammer film from the 60s. And this one I'm working on right now, they're dealing with the Headless Horseman legend. So
that's in New York now. Are they in New York, or is it just that?
Well, it's New England. It's called Cranestown, but it's not a real place, obviously. But it's just somewhere in New England, and we kind of leave it at that.
No, that's totally cool. Yeah, because Sleepy Hollow, New York, that was the first American like story like that, because everything else is like in Germany and like the Black Forest or whatever. So the Headless Horseman, that was the first one here in the U.S. And they talk about that in Tim Burton's movie, and I thought that was really cool. I like that movie pretty well.
Yeah, and the Headless Horseman is is just a great sort of timeless horror villain or character. It's a lot of fun to kind of mess with a little bit, and you can take a little bit from the story or the legend and kind of make it your own, and so you still have some of those elements, but maybe a different take on it. So it's a lot of fun, and it was something. I mean, I was one of my favorites as a kid, so it's fun, kind of fun to revisit that a little bit.
It's very cool. Have you listened to any of the audiobooks or read any of the books that are the Black Badge series?
I have not.
So that's a Western horror thing where it's supernatural monsters. And I like the audiobooks a lot because the guy that they paid to read them is the same voice actor from Red Dead Redemption. And so he's drawing things out and he's just talking the way that he talks in the video game. And it's like, this is just like candy. This is great. He's got this one demon that plays a flute, and the guy's like paralyzed when it plays it. So he fires his gun off entirely too close to his ears, so his ears will be ringing, so he can't be paralyzed by the flute. And then he takes the thing down. It's one of these like Baphomet goat men kind of looking things. Yeah. But yeah, it's neat. How are you going to keep running this series? Is there going to be more Wraiths of God? Is it going to go for a while?
Well, that's the plan, but of course, it always when you're doing crowdfunded projects, it always depends on the crowdfunding, right? Do the people, are they losing interest, or do they, does it still have steam, and hitting the numbers you have to hit to actually publish it, and not lose money? All those kind of things go into factors. So every project might be the first one, it might be the last one. So what I like to do with any of the projects I do, I like to do them as self-contained stories. Now, Wraith of God, there is a dynamic between the Wraith and Esther, his partner, and so that that can go on. That's an unresolved soap opera part of the story, right? But every graphic novel is a different adventure, right? And it's self-contained. There's no cliffhangers in terms of the resolution for with the werewolf story or the vampire story, or in this case, the Headless Horseman story. It'll be resolved at the end of it, but there will always be an open door for the adventures to continue. So it's like, if this project funds well, which it is right now, then you say, okay, well, I'll go and do the next one. But if you get to a point where it's not funding like it used to, and now I'm teetering on maybe not making any money on this anymore, or possibly losing money, then you switch gears and do something different. And I just threw you mentioned Kit Carter, which was the kind of space babe, humorous space babe story I did, graphic novel I did. And I did that in between. I did Wraith of God 1 and 2 back to back. And then I did Kit Carter just to kind of change a pace, to do something else, because I've got a lot of IPs and I'd like to somehow get at least one book out of everything, so you can say you did it, kind of thing. And then I went back to Wraith of God 3. And after this, maybe I go to Wraith of God 4, or maybe I'll throw out another one of my properties and see how people respond to it, and then go back to Wraith of God again. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. But I always try to do everything self-contained, with it being open-ended, so you can always do more if you need to.
Do you have a storehouse of ideas, or do you do like I do, and you've got this stuff like built up and you can see it? I mean, are you seeing like Wendigos and all that? And by the way, I'm like way pro. I don't like the antler thing that people have done with them. I like the Golem Wendigo thing, like the Canadian. It's basically just somebody demon possessed, and inebriated and with frostbite because they're always in the snowy cold or whatever. Have you thought of like ahead with things like that?
I've got what I do in terms of like Wraith of God. I know where the story's going. If I was going to say, okay, this is the last graphic novel, number 5, for example, let's say that's the last one. I know how it's going to end up and how it's all going to turn out. All right. So I have that figured out. Now, in terms of what monsters he might come in contact with along that way, that's always, I've got a bunch that I wouldn't mind doing, but nothing concretely developed at this moment for like, maybe I'll do a swamp monster next. Maybe I'll do a Frankenstein story, which that seems very likely that I would go that route because I'm a big Frankenstein fan.
Oh,
so
yeah.
maybe
Have you read Mary Shelley's? Have you read the original book?
I've read parts of it. It's hard to get through. At least
I listened to the audiobook and I
well,
love it. It's good stuff. But yeah, no, I see Frankenstein. Have you ever thought anything about maybe like the Mothman? Because I like the fact that he shows up before something bad is going to happen, that he's like a harbinger of doom kind of angel demon booger thing.
I haven't specifically, no, but there's so many cryptids and different things out there that you could use. And a lot of times stuff like I kind of fell into the Headless Horseman. As I was doing issue number 2, I wasn't really thinking about Headless Horseman. I was trying to figure, okay, well, what do we want to do next? And someone had actually just suggested to me, we should do a Headless Horseman story. And I went, yeah. And then I started thinking about it, and like this story came together that would work really, really well with it. And I thought, okay, now I've got a good story that I can now use this character with. So usually to me, it's story ideas that sort of my mind is always going, right? And so
I know what that's
something
like.
something will click, and then it'll start to build, and you'll go, okay, then if I could do this, then I did that, and then all of a sudden it comes together, and that's the direction you end up going, or at least that's how I do it. Which is, I got the notepad by my bed kind of thing. If I get up in the middle of the night, you better write that down because if I don't, I'll forget it kind of thing. So
awesome. I hadn't asked about Garbage Man. That's your other thing. When is this set? Like what era, period?
Well, Garbage Man would be modern day. I mean, the interesting thing about Garbage Man was that it originally was created for DC Comics because when I first left Marvel and went over to DC, Dan DiDio and I were talking, and I said I wanted to get into doing some writing because I was getting a little resistance at Marvel to do that. And he was like, I don't care if you write anything. I said, oh, okay, great. And he goes, in fact, we need a monster book because at that time, Swamp Thing was under Vertigo's control.
Yeah.
And even though DC owned Vertigo, they were still separate publishing entities. And there were contractual agreements and they had Swamp Thing. And Dan wanted Swamp Thing back to be used in the regular DCU, and they wouldn't give it to him. So he says, I need a monster book. And I said, well, let me come up with something. I go, that's kind of, I would say it's not my specialty, but it's something that, I'm pretty good at. Let me see what I can come up with. And I came up with Garbage Man, which was essentially a Swamp Thing type character made out of garbage and stuff instead of, swamp material. And he's a lawyer that is, I wouldn't say he's crooked, but he's working for a crooked company, and he's not, he does what he's got to do to make money. He's kind of morally ambivalent.
Yeah.
And
so he's a lawyer that's garbage. Benny, have you ever known of a lawyer that's garbage?
Yeah, you get it? Do you get it now? And so
there are many of them.
Yeah. So he discovers some improprieties in this Titan Pharmaceuticals as they're one of their main clients, and he finds some incongruities with money distribution, stuff like that. And he's not trying to be a whistleblower. He's just like, what am I supposed to do with this? What do you guys want me to do with this? Well, once he finds that out, they figure he's potential liability. So they basically turn him over to their science department, and they have this crazy scientist in there who's been working on a super soldier serum so they can get a contract with the military. And they experiment on homeless people and, people that won't be missed or they don't, and so they experiment on him and it goes bad. And so then they blow up the whole lab. So there's no evidence, and his remains get scattered out all over basically this landfill that's behind the chemical plant. And he reforms. as Garbage Man, and then he gets, revenge against this powerful conglomerate, or the people that were pulling the strings anyway. And it was originally supposed to be, as I mentioned earlier, that possibly a backup story in Batman. But it was part of the DCU. It was going to be part of the DCU. So I was free to use DC characters. Right. And so I included Batman in his, original story miniseries that I did for DC. And so it took place in Gotham City, and which is the perfect, creepy city for a monster, that lives in the underground.
It would be Slaughter Swamp then, if it was in Gotham City. Slaughter Swamp is their swamp.
Yeah, well, Swamp Thing didn't exist in the DCU. That's why Garbage Man was there, is to fill that void.
Okay.
And so I got past about halfway done with this series, and then they were able to get Swamp Thing back from Vertigo. And so Dan just goes, all right, yeah, finish out this miniseries. We're not going to need him anymore. And
wow.
So that's why the rights returned to me, and DC didn't keep the rights to the character, because they got Swamp Thing back and they didn't need Garbage Man. So then Garbage Man became my property. And when I published the collection, they never published the collection of the stories. DC didn't. So I took it to Dark Horse, but I had to remove all the Batman from it. And then I included my own characters to fill in for Batman. And then it got published as a trade paperback through Dark Horse.
Yeah, I saw that it was a trade paperback, and I was like, Benny, I don't know if you get this. A trade paperback is a bunch of comic books put together that have already been put out.
I know what it is.
Okay, otherwise it's a graphic novel, people.
That's right. This was a trade paperback. And then I did one backup story for Garbage Man in the second issue of Wraith of God, Blood Hunters. So those have been that's kind of the publishing history of Garbage Man at the moment, with hopefully more stories to come. But he basically lives, to answer your question, that was a pretty long way to get around to answer your question, but he lives in the sewers with a bunch of kind of caretaker. There's this pastor that lives underground and kind of takes care of the homeless population in this city. And I turned Gotham City into Murnau City, based, F.W. Murnau, the German expressionist director from the silent era. So it's Murnau City, and it's just a creepy, weird city like Gotham City would have been, but it takes place in modern times, though.
What movies did he make?
Metropolis.
Okay, I thought so. Yeah. I own Metropolis. I like silent films.
Yeah, and what was the one with the Dr. Caligari, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari? I'm pretty sure is F.W.
Yes,
Murnau.
I love the Cabinet. That was one of the first movies that had a twist ending, because you think everything's this way.
I never saw it. Please don't say anything.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
When is it from? Like the 20s or the 19s?
It doesn't matter. I'm on the call with you.
Okay.
Don't
and then,
spoil it.
Nosferatu, of course.
Yes.
So,
anyway, thank you for not spoiling.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh. Are you gonna watch it?
I'm gonna now watch it. Yeah,
Okay, see,
I heard it quoted 4 times already.
Every time that we talk, I'm gonna say, "Have you watched the movie yet?" Because if you want to take this hard line of a stance and saying "don't say," then you are liable to watch that movie. And you just
maybe
tell me,
one day I'll watch it. Maybe one day.
Okay. Well, otherwise it wouldn't matter if I told you, unless you didn't care what the spoiler was. But there is a twist.
By the way, one thing I did appreciate you, Aaron, saying, sorry for cutting you off, Ben.
All right. I don't care. I'm good.
Yeah, is a lot of this politics between DC, Marvel, how they produce, how they don't produce. That's a huge insight to knowing we're not really missing much by going to them.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
it's worse now than it ever been. So actually, Fritz Lang did Metropolis. I think about F.W. Murnau was Nosferatu. And I'd have to, one of those two guys did Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I'd have to go back and check. But anyway, it was, I wanted a creepy kind of film reference to the city. And so I thought, Murnau City, why not? But anyway, so just wanted to get the record straight.
No doubt.
Who's your favorite of your properties that you own? Who's your favorite?
Probably Garbage Man, just because I've had him the longest.
Okay.
And
makes sense.
I do, Wraith of God is fun. but they're all, you know, guys fighting monsters. It's either a monster fighting monsters or a superhero fighting monsters, you know. So, um, but yeah, I think the stuff I did for Garbage Man, at least artistically, that I did for the original DC stories, probably the best stuff I've ever done in comics. So that kind of is, you know, special spot in my heart, I guess. But it's funny. People ask you that, and been asked that my whole career. Is like, you know, what's your favorite character? And the answer always ended up being whatever book I'm working on at the time that they asked that question, right?
So you don't have a type. You just kind of like fluctuate.
Well, it's what it is you have to, whether it's your own character or DC or Marvel's, in order to do a good job on this series, you have to really sort of get into the character, understand the character, you know, how you're going to approach it visually, all this kind of stuff. And so then you really get attached to them when you're working on them on a monthly basis. You know, I worked on Ms. Marvel, which I had no interest in the character, but once I started drawing Ms. Marvel, you kind of like, you sort of like, it's like one of your kids, you know, you sort of adopt that character and you don't want anybody else messing with it because they're not going to do it the same way you did it, you know?
Yeah, you personalize it. And I think readers do that. They get locked into a character that they just like feel for them and all that. If I had to say a Marvel guy, I'd probably say like Daredevil or something like that. I probably like Batman the most with DC. I saw an interesting take on comics the other day. And you were talking about how people follow writers and they like certain things more than others. There's a guy named Razor Fist, and he was giving his reviews on Daredevil, and he said that Daredevil's greatest nemesis is Mark Waid. that's a writer, Benny. Yeah, he did not like that run. I've never read Mark Waid. I do have Kingdom Come that I've been meaning to read, but that's because Alex Ross is like a favorite of mine ever since I discovered him in the 90s. Loved it. So the Alex Ross thing will pull me through this. Hopefully it's a lot better than Batman Damned. You know, there's different people and you think I've heard of them, and just the way that I am with like writers, because I do kind of get with that. If I read somebody and if I think this didn't do anything for me, I don't like devote my life to bashing them online like some people like to do. It's just like I just don't read their stuff again. I just think they're not my style. It's just not my thing. Whereas like books like this, it's like I want to get some more of that. What Perkins and who wrote it, whoever wrote it reminded me of me when I write, only it's like me on the best day. Dan Jurgens.
Dan wrote that?
That's who wrote this. Dan Jurgens. So what reminds me of me, because there's some writers that don't use a lot of words, and then I know you can get into the trap where you use too many, but he's got like, it's a good deal of dialogue and it flows. And I'm not like one of these people that just has like one word over here, one word over there, one word over there, like Scotty Young. He writes that way. But no, Dan has a good deal of dialogue in it, but it flows really well and it's not too much. But yeah, that's who wrote it, because it's like, I like the way he writes. I'm like, this reminds me of me, but me at my best, because it's top-notch stuff. It's not like me that I'm going to criticize later.
I worked with Dan on Justice League. Now he's an artist and drew Superman, like Death of Superman. He was one of the artists on that, and been around forever. And he's doing a lot more writing now than drawing. But he's a guy who he knows how to write comics and how to put comic stories together. I really loved working with Dan. And now I worked with Mark Waid on a couple of projects, and I always thought Mark was a really good comic book writer. Now some people like this stuff, some people don't.
Has there been a shift, or is it just people that don't like him because of whatever? Because I've never read his stuff.
Well, I mean, your personality, especially now that we're all online, you know, it's like the less you know about your heroes, the better. And so there's a crowd that doesn't like Mark for various reasons.
Yeah.
But when I worked with him, you know, he wrote really good scripts. For me, it's kind of like, can you tell a concise, fun story? Do you know how much information to put on a page? Those type of things. And Dan and Mark Waid are guys that are very good at that. And, you know, so I'm not going to, and I know Dan personally. I don't know. I know Mark a little bit, but not, you know, really well. He's not someone I've hung out with. I know Dan really well. and Dan's a really good guy. I won't,
Have you
Mark-
read any? Have you read any of this Batman First Night?
I
thing?
haven't.
So it's three books total, but they've got like a trade paperback of it, and it's set in the 1940s, and so it's got a really noir kind of thing going on. He's wearing the purple gloves, he's driving the red car, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to say what the story's about, just that there's like monsters out there. There's people with Tommy guns. There's one scene where the bad guy has a biplane and he's firing the machine gun at it on the bridge. It's just like I just like that. I like that era anyway. And so they've just got like every nuance. They've got electric chair stuff in it and all kinds of stuff like that. But no, it's they go with Commissioner Gordon and have a whole lot of stuff. But the whole thing is done in this way that I can only describe as like the type of stuff that my uncle had to do when he was doing art school, like those kind of like classic illustrations.
Mhm.
And I mean, and I just dig it. I thought that it was really cool. Again, Wesley Dodds is really cartoony, but it's a solid story. And it made me fall in love with the Sandman. And I wasn't even familiar with Wesley Dodds at all. He's Golden Age Benny. It made me get the big compendium, and they're supposed to be coming out with a second one. I've made it about halfway through. And those stories look like more like gritty kind of art and everything. Really bloody and violent. Women getting chained up in basements and beat up to death, and all kinds of dark, stuff going on in there. Some Asian guy cutting off people's faces.
Okay. We gotta close it out. It's already time. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Aaron, for coming on the show. As usual, Ben is always here. Who's next week, Ben? Who we got next week?
I haven't got it lined up yet. I'm working on it.
Oh my goodness!
That's like just like the movie that we talked about. This is a twist.
Okay, usually on point, Ben. So anyway, again, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mr. Lopresti. I appreciate you. We learned so much. Please come back again. We want to learn more. Obviously, you got a lot more to tell. Everybody, don't forget QR code his website. His website is aaronlopresti.com. It's a very cool website. Check it out. The QR code is right here. We'll also put in our YouTube descriptions for all our iShook Comics episodes and our future iShook episodes in general, because we have a lot in this network going on, and we appreciate you coming. We appreciate everything you've said. I've learned a lot today for even my comics and Super Black and our production team. So we appreciate you coming. Everybody, don't forget, click on their channels, get to know them, get to connect with them, because they're not only illustrators and writers, they are peoples who have stories to tell. May God bless everybody.